Hi, all you wonderful painters and subscribers out there. The video that I'm putting up today is generally reserved just for the members of my art course. It's one of the monthly live Q&As, but there was so much information in there that really corresponded with the questions that I get often in the YouTube comments on my videos that I thought maybe I'd share this one with you. So remember, it was live, and I cut out a couple of little parts of it that were kind of technical glitches that I was just working out at the very beginning of the webinar. But other than that, it's it is the way that it was when we had the webinar. So hopefully you'll be patient with that, but there's so much good information in it that I thought you'd enjoy seeing it anyway. So enjoy it and have a lot of fun painting. I'll talk to you later.
I think it is live now. Unfortunately, I had it close out on me again when I was closing out all my email accounts, and I'm hoping that it didn't go and lose everybody that was registered for the broadcast, since I had to open it up again. So we shall see. Now it looks like people are coming on in. All right, welcome everyone. And I probably look a little different than I did last time. Turned 50 a couple weeks ago and decided that all that thinning stuff was just a little bit too much of a hassle, especially in the wintertime when I take hats on and off, so it is all gone. So hopefully that's not off-putting for you, but it sure is a lot more convenient. Okay, and I think Christy was getting logged in as well. Hopefully she's going to be on here and she can tell me if I get anything out of sorts. All right, so it's 3:30. We'll get started. All right, welcome everyone for our January question and answer. And then we also had the paint together. Oh, no. All right, I got the paint together completed, but I forgot to take a picture of it. I knew I was forgetting something. So I'll grab it real quick. Actually, maybe I'll have Christy come over and take a picture. Yeah. I'll have to have Christy come over and grab a picture of it real quick so that I can put it up on in Photoshop with everybody else's. Sorry about that. That's just terrible. All right. Okay, so we've got, see, hopefully all right, Christy's there. Looks great, Bill. Okay, so hopefully Christy will be, yep, there she is. Yeah, I'm brilliant, I know. Sorry. Here, you know what, I'll take a picture real quick. Give it to you.
Sorry, I'll do it. I'm taking too long.
She is all ready for yoga. She teaches yoga here, and she didn't want to come on looking yoga-ish. So,
Sloppy.
yep. One of my class students is on with one of the members today. Okay, so let's get right to some of the questions then. So I had a couple that weren't, well, actually I think one that wasn't actually a member of the course, but I thought it was a good question. So I'm going to cover that as well. I get a lot of questions from people on YouTube and other places, I suppose. So let's see. It said, why do you load your brushes like a scoop? So the person in question actually ordered one of my other videos, like I just finished the Cottonwood video full, and I think she was watching that one. She said, why do you load your brushes like a scoop? After your brush is loaded, how do you apply to the board? And so I responded to that one. I'm going to read what I put in there because I thought through it well when I did it. So I said, I'd like to get the majority of the paint on the tips of the bristles so I know how much paint I have to work with. I can see the amount of paint I have picked up on the end of my brush. And so just to describe that a bit, hopefully some of this, as you've gone through the videos, has come out in all of that. But I'm never completely sure exactly what you're getting from the videos and how well I've explained all of that. So when I'm basically what this is referring to is it's really the way I do it most of my, especially my dry brush technique, and that seems to be what I get the most questions about is the dry brush technique that I use. So when I'm pushing that brush forward, on my palette, oh here, I'll grab the brush. I haven't even gotten to wash out my brushes here since I finished that other painting yesterday. Thank you, Christy. Yeah, that'd be great. Okay, so on my brush, generally we mix up paint on our palette, and then we take some paint, and usually you'll see a lot of artists that'll scoop it this direction with their brush. Well, I have a tendency to push my brush straight into the paint and have it bunch up on the end of my brush right there. That's because then I can see how much paint I have on my brush, and often what I'm wanting to get from that is a pile on here. So even when I'm not putting in real thick, opaque bits of paint on my painting, specifically like when I'm putting in leaves on, say, an aspen tree, and I want to get some individual leaves that stand out on there. Well, then obviously I'm going to take and get a bunch of paint on there, a thick glob of paint on there, so I can put in some nice three-dimensional opaque bits of paint. But when I'm doing dry brush technique, I want to have the same thing. I want to have paint on the very end of my brush because it's these bristles right here that are important. So when I push this down through the paint, it's accomplishing basically two things. First of all, I'm getting paint on the end of my brush that I can see how much exactly is on there. And I've done it for so many years that I don't actually have to analyze it much. I basically know how much I've gotten on there. But it's kind of a visual cue for me. So if I pick up too much, very quickly, my mind tells me there's probably a little bit too much, and it will help me to either place a little bit of that back into the pile and redo it, rather than, so when I say redo it, it's because if I just go and try to knock some of that off of there, it has changed the shape of that pile on the end of my brush, and pretty much when I'm pushing it through, I'm getting a consistent amount of a consistent shape to the paint on the end of my brush, such that I'll know how it's going to get applied when I put it onto the panel. So hopefully I won't lose my train of thought here. The second thing is with that bunch of paint, as I'm dragging it off the brush, especially in a dry brush where I'm not getting nearly as much paint on the end of it. So if I'm doing it real opaque and I want some nice thick three-dimensional globs of paint on my panel, or on my painting panel, then I'm going to get more paint on there. But if I'm doing a dry brush technique, I'm still getting that paint onto the end of the bristles here, but I'm getting a much smaller amount of it. And as I start dragging that across the panel, especially when I have texture on my panel, it's going to just pick up. I'm going to have a light pressure with that brush on there, and it's going to just pull the little bits of that paint off of there until, oftentimes, especially the way that I push it through, it helps to splay out the bristles a little bit, and then I'm getting more of the individual broken bristles for that dry brush technique. So really, that's why I'm scooping like that instead of dragging my brush through the paint. If that makes sense. Let me grab the towel. really good. So I don't know if I'll have to go back through all the videos, especially that final one with the aspen tree stuff, to see how well I explain that. But maybe I'll put a little addendum video or something in there so that it's more clear about that. Let's see. And then Denise said, I have one problem that's particularly frustrating. When I paint a layer on top of another, the paints often mix together. You always seem to paint wet on wet with no problem. What might I be doing wrong? Okay, so much of that has to do with the pressure that I'm exerting with my brush. And making sure that I have enough paint on my brush as well. So that's part of the reason why I scoop the paint, again, instead of pulling my brush through the paint. Because when I scoop, I've got enough paint on the end of my brush that when I lay, if I've already put one layer down, so let's say that I've taken a little bit of walnut oil and I've put my washes onto the panel, and I've gotten that all on there, then I can come back on top of that and to a great degree not disturb the underlayer. I can, because really the purpose to the dry brush technique that I use so often is so that I can have those underlayers of colors still coming through the top layers of paint. And obviously the thicker, more opaque paint, I'm not going to have that happening. But with a lot of my painting, I'm layering those colors in a way that the underlying colors are still coming up through my top layers of paint. And I like that. I like that play of colors that way. I like how they all intermingle, not in a blending way, but in an optical way, so that that actually adds a whole lot more variety and interest to the painting when I'm finished with it. Let's see. So as far as if an artist, if a student, or if a painter has a tendency to put one layer on top of another and they're mixing together rather than having one break through and show through the other, it's a matter of usually too much pressure with the brush. So a lot of, even when I'm going quickly and it might not look like it, I'm using a fairly light pressure. Just enough pressure so that it's dragging the paint off the brush, but not so much pressure that I'm picking up the original layer of paint. So that really takes experimentation, playing with your brush strokes over and over again until you get the feeling for how that works real well. Hopefully that's making sense. Let's see, and then there's on these webinars, there's about I don't know, 15 to 30-second delay between me speaking and it getting to you. Unfortunately, that really can be a pain. So when you put comments in the chat room and I answer them, if you come back with another question, there's usually a delay there, so I don't see it very quickly. Okay, she probably has my picture. Let me check and see if I've got my painting here. I'm downloading that real quick. Put it in with the rest of them. Okay, so put that into Photoshop real quick. All right, and let's get back to the questions. So let's see. And then Mike said, I don't know if what you have online right now is all of the actual course or not, but if you're going to add to it for the future, please provide more examples of your painting techniques for creating trees, rocks, mountains, shrubs, water, etc. If you could show closer, more detailed views of how you lay in things like trees, rocks, water, etc., that would be fantastic and most helpful. So The way that I put the course together, I tried to do it in a way that it was teaching principles without actually showing too many specifics, because there aren't really specifics. Since it's not formula painting, that makes it complicated. Principle-based painting is designed so that when you learn the principles behind how I paint, then you can take every individual situation and apply those principles in a way that will help you to manage that particular scene. But if I teach you, like when I paint rocks, I don't generally paint rocks from one painting to another the same way. It depends on so many different variables: the lighting conditions, the reflected lights. There's so many things that can influence the way that I paint rocks, that there isn't just one, this is how I do it kind of situation. But there might be specific scenarios where this happens often kind of thing. And as I come across those in my painting, especially as the spring comes and I'm outside a whole lot more with the plein air painting, I'll try to get some situations like that will be instructive and add those to the course as we go. So that hopefully that might help with some individual situations like that, like painting rivers or a particular type of tree, that sort of thing. So as you have, as you're out painting, or as you're going through the course and you mimic some of the things that you see in there, if there's something that you're just not getting the hang of it, or it doesn't seem to be working the way that you'd like it to, then email me with the situation that you're having and how that's affecting you, or what you'd like to see happen in your own art, and then I can try to tailor something to that. That'll help me to get really honed in on some of the things that might really be beneficial to you. Let's see. Webinar rewind. Oh yeah, that's a good thing. When I send out the replay of this to everyone, you'll see in the bottom, these are being recorded to YouTube just on an unlisted channel. So the only people that have it are the ones that get the link to it. So when you see that replay, then down in the lower right corner, you'll see the YouTube icon. Just click on that, because what she was mentioning here, Susan said that the webinar, when she sees that on the webinar replay page, there's no rewind or fast forward spot in there. And that can be very helpful, especially when all you're seeing is the back of my head as I'm walking somewhere. So, or if there's something in particular, like a critique you wanted to get to and you wanted to watch it over and over again, click on that YouTube link or YouTube icon. It'll take you to YouTube, and then you'll have that fast forward and rewind capability there. Let's see. Okay, and then I have had one person who purchased the course and then wrote and said that, and this is at over, we've had over 90 people purchase the course, so quite a few. And we've had one person who wrote and said that she loves, well, I'll read what she said. I would love to continue following you in your painting. You're one of the best, not only painters, but instructors I've found, and I've looked and viewed many over the years. I love your roses, all your other paintings, and your kindness and humor comes across. When I looked at the videos included in the ones I purchased, was impressed with your knowledge and skills. So she liked the course, but she said that it was over her head, that the way that I was teaching it principle-based like that was, she's in her later years, she's retired, and she said that she has basically just done some weekend painting, and that the course was way over her head. So I haven't gotten any other comments like that, and she purchased one of my like the cottonwood and the rose paintings, where it's every step of every brushstroke of the painting, and I just do some voiceover with it. She's going to see if she can follow along with that and then try to paint that. But the course itself was just, the principles were too advanced for her, at least what she saw quickly. So if any of you are feeling like that, if you would, send me some emails specifically about in what way it's over your head, in a way that I can tweak some things. I can do some changes to some of the videos, or some add-ons to some of the videos that will explain it in a way that will be actionable. Because most of the comments I've gotten back from people who are applying the principles, and it's working in their painting. They're improving their work. And so that's really what the course was designed for. So if there's anyone that feels like, wow, I'm just not seeing how I can apply these things quite yet, let me know what I can do to make that, illuminate that a little bit better in a way that you can actually apply them directly on a daily basis in your work. And really, with all of this, the only way that this course is going to work for you is if you watch the videos, especially take one at a time, and then try to do what I've done in those videos. Take some portion of it and then try to mimic that. So when I was in college, and I had some really good instructors, excellent, and they did a lot of demonstrations. That was my favorite part of what they did, because I could watch them in actuality painting these things rather than seeing the finished product and then wondering, you know, trying to break that down and see how they did it. I was able to watch how they did all the way along, when they'd stop and think about it, all of that sort of thing. So that's the way I designed this course, was the idea that with demonstrations, you can see how it's done and then do that. And that's what I would do. I would then go home, or I would go out on location, and I would think about what they did and try to mimic that. So in my early years, I did a lot of my plein air painting, because my first 6 years of painting were almost entirely on location. And that's because one of my main professors, he was good friends of Sergei Bongard, and they were plein air painters. And that's what I did. I would go out with him, just the two of us, because none of the other students seemed to be too interested in plein air painting. This was 1985, and then again in 1989. So it just wasn't the byline at that time. Plein air painting wasn't as well known. In fact, I had never even heard the term plein air painting when I was going out on location like that. So we would go out and paint on location. I would watch how he would do it, and then I would do that. And so for my first 6 years, a lot of it was painting in a very similar way to the way my friend and professor was painting. And then the more that I painted, the more I started to catch my own little things that I liked. So suddenly I would do some kind of a stroke and think, wait a minute, what did I just do there? And what just happened? And I would think about that and ponder over it and continue to do that again. And so over time, I started to develop my own way of seeing when I was out there, and then applying that to my canvas and changing things. But in the very beginning, much of what I did was a mimic of what he did. And that then was kind of a springboard for me to do my own thing. So really that's what this course is for. Take the principles that you learn in there, try to mimic, possibly even copy some of my paintings as you're doing it. And as you copy those, you'll start to get a feeling for how I applied the dry brush technique that so many seem to struggle with, or painting wet on wet and getting one layer to lay on top of another. Really, it's doing it and doing it over and over again. So I was painting all the time. I still am painting all the time. And that's how you get a feeling for how to accomplish those things. Let's see, any other questions I have on here? I don't have any other questions that were actually sent in. So I'm going to get to the painting critiques, unless you put a question in the chat room for me. And if you do, that's just great. I'll try to get back to those at that time. Okay, so I'm going to screen share this, and let's see, no comments in it. Yeah, thank you, Christy. That's great. All right. So now we're going to look at the Photoshop icon here, and I wish I knew of some other mouse icon there. Oh, let's see. Present to everyone. Is it presenting? Okay, there we go. I wish I knew of some other way of getting this mouse icon so it stood out big and bold for you, but hopefully you can see that all right. Okay, so that's right. Christy said I should show the pic that I gave out first. Actually, there were 3 pictures. Let's see. I think I have some of those up. Okay, so there's one of the pictures. There's one, and there's one. And oh, you can't see that one. So there's one of the pictures. I'll bring up the others here. Okay, so this is what we started with. And then I'll just show you, and that's taking a little while. Sorry, like I said, I'm an artist, not a techie kind of person. Okay, so basically I did that one overall. And then I sent out the 3 of them so that you could kind of get an idea. You know, sometimes people like to put the road a little bit farther down on the picture plane than that, and keep the horizon line lower. I did mine pretty much like this one right here, with just some subtle variations in there. So that's what I came up with from this right here. And so you'll see that there are some definite changes in my picture compared to the photograph here. And really that's because overall I'm trying to get the feeling of what the picture is conveying. And remember too that I took the picture, so I was there at the time, and still when I see the pictures, when I'm taking these pictures, it's not just a quick, well, I'm going to take pictures of everything that's around me and not really pay much attention to it. When I'm taking photos out on location like that, they are references for me for future use. And I'm ingraining, I'm not just taking a picture, but I'm really looking at what I'm taking a picture of. So in this case, with any of my work, when I go and use a photo as a reference, I don't want to just get a duplicate of the photograph that's kind of redundant and to me a little bit worthless. It's a good exercise if you're trying to get your skills down for creating realism, but that's about as far as it goes. Why else? Otherwise, I could just keep the photograph there. So when I have a photograph, I'm going to be thinking about what it is about that photograph that I like. What was it about that scene when I was there that really appealed to me? Why did I stop and take a picture of that particular thing, of that area? There was something about it that stood out to me. So that's what I'm going to concentrate on. So in this, for the most part, it was the colors that I loved and the way the light was streaming through here. And in one of the paintings that you'll see here in just a minute, the artist really captured those sun rays, and I didn't even notice, because when I put these photos up on my monitors, they're a good, I think it was 15 feet away from my easel. So I'm only seeing bits of the photograph. I'm not actually seeing all the small details in there. I do that intentionally. I could take my monitor and move it right over there near my easel, or I could have the photograph go print it out and then put a photograph over there by my easel. But I don't want that. I don't want to get so bogged down in the details that I lose the overall essence that really is what I'm trying to capture in my painting. So with this painting here, I was focusing on the colors. So in here, if you can, hopefully you can see that well. The lavenders that I put in here, they're on the warmer side of a lavender, and they're to help give some variety to all these yellows and oranges. Oftentimes what I found when I put in yellows and oranges like this is that if I don't temper it a little bit with the complementary color, like the reddish lavender that I have in here, then it's a little bit too powerful and warm, too much yellow and orange. And that can be overwhelming for the viewer. So just placing in some lavenders in some of these colors in here can help to bring some softening to the viewing experience that way. So the same thing, that's why I put in, as you can see, all these complementary tones throughout here. The blues, the bluish lavenders back here are really to help create that distance, to push somebody back into that forest area. And then I have some lavenders throughout here, the lavender road. All of that is to help balance the overall yellow color scheme that I have up in the top. And then I really love the warmth of the light source that's coming through there and how that works with all the leaves. So really this was, for me, an exercise in layering some of these colors on top of each other and getting a good mix of the yellows and greens and lavenders so that they all work together and yet created that sense of distance, one color on top of another. Let's see. So let's get to some of the other paintings. I'll come back to this one, and as we go, I'll put in fact, I should have done that already. I'll take this photo of my painting here and put it up on the membership site so that after this webinar, you can refer back to that if you want to get some ideas that will help you with your own work. Now, I did have Joan that wrote to me and talked about how she thought maybe I should send out the picture is blurry. Looks great though. Picture's blurry. Is it not coming through well on the webinar side of things? See, I have a nice crisp picture here. Sorry, Ross, on my monitor. I don't know what you're getting from your end though. The picture that I put up on the membership site will be nice and crisp and clear. Okay, so back to Joan. She wrote and after the last webinar and said that there was a lot of, well, basically when I'm doing some of the critiques, I tended to spend more time on some than on others, and that when we do the paint-togethers, she thought it might be instructive if I said the things that were pitfalls. Like in some of the winter scenes, I pointed out how some of the trees were going back in a row, like three trees in a row. And then I said, you know, it was a good thing to break up that pattern, so that if I had pointed that out in the beginning, then artists would have avoided that. And I thought about that before I did anything with these paint-togethers and sent out photos like that. The first time I sent out a photo, I thought, well, should I tell people not to include the bridge, that maybe the bridge might be distractive? Or with the winter scene, I noticed that the trees were in a pattern, and I knew that that might be a pitfall for artists on there. So I thought maybe I should let people know about some of those things. But as I pondered over that, my idea was if I did that, then somebody might actually miss a good opportunity, because sometimes I'm not seeing it the best way to see it. there might be somebody else out there that will see it in a way that I didn't even think about. That's what's so exciting about being artists. There's so much room for everyone. It's the variety. It's the different ways of seeing things that makes the art world so engaging and lifelong. Otherwise, we would take one scene and somebody would paint it and it would be done. There would be nothing else left for somebody else to do. So to me, we had some people who, like with the bridge scene in the river, we had some people that left the bridge in there, some people who took the bridge out. And I think that's great. That's awesome. That's the way it should be. It's that idea that if you take 10 professional artists who have been painting for decades and you place them all in a row up on a hillside or in front of some kind of a scene, and you say, paint this, and they're all standing there right next to each other, all 10 of those artists are going to be different. They're going to come up with something unique to their neighbors, to the people painting right next to them, because we all see something different there. We're all looking at it and thinking, wow, that really appeals to me, and somebody else is thinking something completely different appeals to them, whether it's the texture of leaves or the way the light is hitting a particular something, some object. There's always something there that's going to appeal differently to each of us. So when I send these photos out, I don't intend to tell you the pitfalls ahead of time, because I want you, number one, it's for that idea of everyone having a different experience. Number two, is if you paint it the first time and run into those pitfalls and don't realize you've run into those pitfalls, then you will have learned something from it. It's going to become much more apparent to you in the future than if I had told you about those things in the first place. Because then you would have never had the experience of painting it and realizing that there was another way to do it. If I go through these critiques and you get the idea that I should have pointed this out to you before, I hope you realize that you're going to be a lot farther ahead by having gone through that experience than not having gone through that experience. And then after we've gone through the critique a bit, you can take some of the things that I think might be strengthened and then learn even more as you redo that. That's the way that I did it when I was a student as well. And I think it's a great way to learn. If you have another way of learning, something that helps you even more, send me those specific examples or ideas, and I'll see about how well that can be incorporated into what we do here. Because these webinars are for you, they're not for me. And so anything that'll help you, I'm open to all of those suggestions that way. Doesn't mean I'll necessarily agree or do it or anything like that, but fully I'm going to think about what you said and see how well I can apply it. And if I can apply it and it's going to work well for everyone, I'm going to do that. So I'm very open to ideas. Okay, so this is one actually Elizabeth sent in too. This is the one from last month that she didn't get done in time for the last webinar, and she wanted a critique of that. What I will do is try to give a few ideas in here and go as quickly as I can so that we're not on this webinar for too long. And then if you want additional critique, just tell me, and in the next one, I can give even more critique to it. But I'd like to keep the critiques on the webinars so that everybody can benefit from it, if that's possible. Now, if you're somebody who's shy and you don't want your painting critiqued on a webinar, feel free to send it to me and I'll do it privately for you. Okay, so on here, and just ahead of time, you all did a beautiful job with these paintings. So often when I start to do something like critiquing it, the first thing I go in there to do is to look for what I have to offer to you to improve it. So if I forget to comment on the wonderful things you did, it's just because I get so focused in on trying to help you improve it if I can. All right, so that's my disclaimer for the day. Alrighty, so Elizabeth, nice job. I like some of the transition that you have here between the lavenders here and your blues going back in here into the shadow areas. Let's see. So first off, one thing that is always very good to know about light, the way that light works on an object. So this is a really great example of that, this tree right here on the left. If you notice, it's almost like it's triangular shaped, okay, like a tripod shape here. Right here at the bottom, it's wider than up here at the top. And the way that light works, there's a thing called diffraction. I think I talked about that a little bit in one of the videos. I can't remember now. It's been too long since I saw the videos. But there's a thing called diffraction, and especially on round objects. So a tree is really a circle. It's a sphere, right? Not a sphere, but it's a cone. What is that called? Anyway, okay. Sorry about that. So as the light hits an object like this, especially when it's more round, rather than like a flat wall or something like that, it's going to diffract. And the amount of diffraction increases with the object as it becomes more round. So a ball has much more diffraction around it. And what diffraction is, it's bending of the light waves. The light will actually bend around an object. So a round ball, the light will bend around that round ball much more so than it will bend around a flat wall or like a fence that's going around a yard. Okay, there's a top to it. And if you get to the top of that, the light will actually, as it comes over the top of that wall, it will diffract, it'll bend down, but it won't bend nearly as much as if that wall rounded instead of was a flat object like that. In a situation where you have a cone or like a tree, where a tree is usually wider at the base than it is at the top, which is really helpful for a scene like this one that we did right here, where we have some objects that come up into that light source a lot more. At the base of the tree, you're going to have less diffraction than you will at the top. So you're going to have less light bending around it than up here, which means that this is going to be darker generally at the base of the tree than it is at the top of the tree. Oh, cylinder. Thank you, Debbie. I could not get that in my head. Okay, cylinder. That's right. So if you have a cylinder like this, where it's thinner at the top than at the bottom, then that's why, let's say that this tree is heading up into a strong light source, then the top of it is going to be lighter, which she did a good job of right here. This is lighter than what we have down here. But you can apply that in subtle degrees all the way from the bottom to the top. Little subtle changes in the value and strength of the contrast between the light of the tree and the dark side of the tree. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that in every instance you're going to have huge change between them, but it's a good thing to keep in mind as you go up. So in this case, let's see, one of the things here is when you have a real strong line between a shadow here and the light source here, it almost looks as if the tree has something that is like the bark on the tree has been cut or it has peeled away from the tree and is coming up away from the tree and is catching the tree here and creating a very strong shadow here. So these were handled in a very nice way over here, where you have some transitional tones between the shadow side and the light side of the tree. So in this tree, I would work a little bit more with some of those. It doesn't necessarily have to be as light, especially if you want to have variety between the different trees. It doesn't have to be as light on this shadow as what you have over here, but some of those transitional tones that you have between the light side and the dark side would be nice to put into here so that you have a nice softening transition. Basically that you're going to have the light on the lightest part where the light's hitting the tree, then you're going to have kind of a half tone. It's not as light as the light side, and it's definitely not as dark as the shadow side or the shade side, but it's a transitional tone. So keeping in mind those transitional tones will help to create that rounding effect on the tree. And you can break that up. It doesn't have to be like a hard line all the way up and down the tree, because that's broken up with bits of bark and other little branches that are coming through, atmosphere in the air, the way the light hits on something floating in the air. There are so many different things between us and our subject that can cause a disruption in a hard line. And that's why edges are such a critical thing in painting. Getting edges correctly can be the difference between something looking fake or realistic. Even if we're painting in an impressionistic manner, we can still have the feeling of realism if our values and our edges are done appropriately. That helps tremendously in the feeling of realism. Sorry, I got something in my throat. Okay, let's see, what else? A nice way of transitioning between a darker area of sky over here and lightening it up, because really the sky does do that. From one end to another, you'll have a darkening and lightening of the sky, even from, well, basically because the sun's closer to one side of the sky than another. So, but a lot of artists don't do that. They'll paint the sky the same value from the left to the right side. And so that's good that you did that. And let's see. Otherwise, really nice. I love a lot of the tones and transitions that you have in here. This tree right here, maybe getting some, and this one back here, just some little fun branches like you have over in this one, because all of the interest really is pulling the eye over here. And these are so, even just putting in a few branches here and there that can convey some of that color that you have over in this area will help to pull the viewer's eye over here as well. And maybe pulling a little bit of this foliage over into this area, you know, not necessarily a lot, but just so that it kind of pulls the viewer from one side into the other. They kind of help to move the viewer around rather than having a harsh break from one spot to another. Otherwise, good job on that, Elizabeth. And then with this one, this is where I didn't even notice until you put these in here that there were strong light rays coming through there. I didn't look at the picture that closely. That shows you how little I sometimes pay attention to the details in my photographs. So I like that, having the light rays coming through there. That gives the sense that we know that there's a light source shining through. And I love the colors that you have, throughout here. Now the picture I think is getting some glare on it over in this area, so I can't see clearly your color or the value very strongly in this side of it, on the right side there, and that makes that hard to judge. But I love the transition that you have between the dark value here of this foliage and how it lightens out as you go towards the light source. That creates a nice three-dimensional quality to it. Your tree branches, the one thing I would possibly work at is if you could add some nice color tone changes in some of your branches, because really your trunks here and your branches here look from the photograph to be about the same color and the same value. So if, let's see, it's mine, it takes too long to switch back and forth. Here, I'll go back to this a little bit. So as you can see, like with this branch right here, that's the strongest branch coming out into here. I have a much darker value here than as I come out into the light. And that's basically that diffraction that we were talking about. I'm lightening this because there's much more light circulating and bending around this branch than there is when it's farther in here. And besides that, this is more in shadow as well. This is farther out into the light. But then as I want to create distance with my scene, this one right here that I want to feel much more close to us, or at least somewhat closer to us than over in this area, this is going, I made this darker here than I did some of these tree trunks and branches out here. And then even with this one, I added in some of those lavender colors to it. And then as this branch, so right here where the, hopefully you can see my mouse all right, that's why I'm shaking it around a lot, just so you can kind of see that. Where the tree branch is farther into the shadow area, I have the value darker, and I have the color, a different color than what I did when I come out. So I transitioned this branch, mimicking some of the colors of the area of all the leaves that are around it. And I'll do that quite a bit. So even, or I'll use the complementary color, like with these branches right here, I use more of a lavender color in those. It's a blue lavender and then some red lavenders in there to give it variety. So same thing, these branches, these tree trunks that are going way off into the distance, they're more of a lavender, whereas as opposed to the much more warm reds that I used in some of the tree trunks in this area. Okay, so let's go. So just changing up, and you have some changes right in here, which that's nice right there. So just getting some variety like that will help with that. It can also be nice when you have branches like this to have some here and there that have some of the leaves that are coming over them more. And that helps to make this feel like it's a part of a lot of this foliage that you have here, rather than a tree branch that's on top of or in front of, closer to us than that tree foliage, if that makes sense. Otherwise, you've got some really beautiful colors and some fun stuff that's happening in there in your painting. One other quick thing that might be instructive as well, with your road right here, it has a tendency, because the values are basically about the same here as they are here, what that does is it's kind of flattens the picture plane and has the tendency to make that road tilt upwards towards us rather than sitting down on the ground. So some transitional tones, let me go back again, like let's see, what can I point out there? Some of the ways that I tried to push this down into the ground or changing a little bit the coloration, like right here, these blues, and then a bit of the dark color right there. Boy, how do I explain that? Creating transitional values here between the road here and the bank. So I have the dark values in here and then the mid values right here that are separate, but they're kind of overlapping and broken up a little bit so that they move back and forth, so that the road and the side transitional areas kind of feel like they belong with each other that way. Okay, so same thing with this right here. Getting some other colors and stuff in there would be nice. You've got so many nice color transitions and variations in your foliage in here. Getting some of that into your side banks will be helpful too for that. Really nice job there, Elizabeth. Okay, Gloria, again, a beautiful job. So you can see what a fun variety we have going on here. You know, you can have this one feels much more intimate, as in the feeling of everything being much more closely combined there. This one is much more open, and both of them are successful. So this one, it really pulls us back in there into that, and she's got the road coming around and then going up back in here into this light area. So really nicely done as far as the stronger values here, and then softening out as it goes off into the light area there. I like that your road really feels as if we're kind of on a hilly area where you were coming up, and then it comes and levels out and almost goes down a little bit. You approach that really well. And then the feeling of that dusty, actually it was the dust as we came up the road. I saw it in my rearview mirror. I saw the effect of it. That's why I stopped and then got out of the car and got photographs of that. It's because all that dust from us coming up the dirt road created all that you see with the light effect there. And you've captured that really well in here. And then I like how you chose to add in some trees back here to help pull the viewer back onto the idea that this is a bank, and there are trees on top of the bank and trees on the side of it, just like we have in the area closer to us. So nice job. One thing that I would think about is this right here. It becomes a very strong arrow or triangle in there, and breaking that up, you've started to do that a little bit here, but they're so light in comparison with this that it doesn't effectively break up that strong line. And yes, that strong line to an extent, where's that at? Was in the photograph. That's one of those pitfalls that we're talking about, where you have that arrow in there. But it's one of the things that we as artists want to overcome. What it does is it creates this arrow that points us straight on out of the painting to an extent. And it creates a hard line that doesn't necessarily benefit the feeling of foliage in there. So if we go back, what I did to overcome that was to pull some of it up into here, a little bit in here, and keep those values basically about the same as what I had in the other parts of the foliage. And then I pulled some of it down this way too with a branch, just to try to break up that arrow. And I still have a bit of that, but hopefully I've broken it up enough that it doesn't feel like an arrow in there so much. And then often when we get to the top of a painting, now this, it might be just fine, but if we want to pull ourselves down a little bit more into here, taking foliage right on off the painting can be very helpful, even if it's not in your photo, or if you're on location or whatever and they kind of stop. Still, pulling them off the top of the painting, this can actually become a tangent that becomes distractive for the viewer. Not always. It might be effective, and it's much different looking at an original than it is at a photograph. So take in mind that I'm looking at a photo of your painting and not your original, and that has a lot of bearing on some of the things that I say might not be accurate based on when you're looking at your actual painting. But often when we have something like that, just take the trees and the foliage and take them right up over the top and off the edge of the painting. Same thing with right here. And you know, some of that, the frame's probably going to cover that up, so it will be a moot point. But it's always nice to have that in the painting itself, even before a frame's on there. Maybe pull some of, just so that this isn't as heavy. If you want to break that up at all, it's nice to pull some of this light into some of these areas. And remember when you put, like, take some of this sky color and you want to put it into some of this foliage, then make that sky color, generally speaking, a little bit darker than the color that you have out here. So a little bit darker value than what's out here, because what happens to light is that all of these leaves and everything around there actually cut off some of the light source, and it'll darken that. So if we tend to take a spot right here and just place it in there, it becomes kind of like a spotlight or a beacon that shines out to us and looks too strong. And often when I have like an area of sky like this one and this one right here, I will take just a small little thin branch or a bit of lighter leaf color than what the rest of the value around it might be, and place it in there, like just a small branch cutting across that area of sky. It will help to then make it so that it feels like it's behind everything, rather than sometimes those sky holes can feel like they're on top of our center of interest rather than behind the object. All right, so otherwise, I like it. You guys, really, you're doing a great job. So beautiful. I love the lavenders that you have in here, and the way that you are transitioning up with the variation in colors and tones. Beautiful. Now, these patches right here, I'm not entirely sure if they belong, the way that their values are, if they belong to this tree, or if they're like a tree, like this one right here. It almost looks as if this trunk comes up to these, and that they're attached to that. But then at the same time, I think that they might belong to this over here. So clarifying that a bit might help too. All right, let's go to Jones. Beautiful variety of trees with the different trees that you have in here. And you've chosen to take artistic license and really change the scene quite a bit. So a lot of what I mentioned in Elizabeth's, like with the winter scene, can apply equally to what you have here. Some of the tree trunks that you have been treated in almost an identical sort of way. And some of what is fun in viewing art is that variety. So you can, now these trees, for the most part, it looks like you've made all of these more on the pine tree side of things. So that would be a good reason to have the trunks look very similar to one another. But even when you have a group of pine trees that are all together, there can still be a lot of variety in there. So you can have an area where the light comes through and hits one area, or even reflected light coming through. It makes it a little bit different than another area of the tree. And I know with pine trees, you can get a lot of nice warm reddish browns and that sort of thing in those trees to help warm up those trunks quite a bit. So you've got these, it's a warmer green, but it's still the yellows here. Some reds in there would really help to warm that, especially with how cool overall your shadow is on those, the shadow side of that, or shade side. At the end of these critiques, I have something else I'm going to share with you, because I saw a short video by an artist named Dan Edmondson, I think, and he was talking about warm shadows, cool light, warm light, cool shadows, and how that was not correct. I had to correct him on that because he was getting something confused and bringing up what I just talked about, shadow, and on here. In fact, let me talk about that real quick, because we can use this as an example in here of what we're talking about. So in this video that he had, where he said that the idea of, you've probably all heard the term, because I've used it, especially I think in the video on color. I talked about how if you have a warm light source, and in fact, I took the paper towels and put them on a panel for you so you could see the cast shadow from those paper towels. All right, and if you notice, when you have a warm light source, the shadow on there is cool. So yellow light source, and the shadow coming off of there is going to be more on the blue side, right? It's cool. If you have a cool light source, like a north light coming through your window, or even if you're in the shade and you have a north light, cooler light source, your shadows are going to tend to be warmer. Well, in his video, he showed a paper towel, like what I did in that video, only he was taking the side of the paper towel and calling that the shadow. So if you see something like that, don't get confused, because that is confusing for a lot of artists out there. When professional artists are referring to the shadow that is cool, they're talking about the cast shadow that comes off the back of the object. The shadow on the side of the object, right here, that's the shade. That's the shade created on the object itself. That is not the cool shadow that we're talking about. And the shade on the object itself can often mimic the light source. So it will often be warm if the light source is warm, or it will often be cool if the light source is cool. But that's completely different from when we're talking about warm light, cool shadows. So warm light, like what we have here, where that light source is warm, the cast shadow coming behind is going to tend to be cooler. But that also depends, and this is why there are no formulas, because that's going to depend, especially on all of the refracted and reflected light that's coming into that shadow as well. So there's going to be a whole lot of changes in there. And then when let's say we have a warm light source that, like the light source, the sun's coming through here, and warming everything up in this area. Well, when you get over into a shaded area, then you're not getting that direct warm light source. You're having more of the cool light source that comes from the sky itself, because the warm light source is being blocked off. So when you have the cool light source of the sky itself creating most of the light that's coming in here in a shaded area, then much of your shadow area can actually be warm. I know that gets confusing, but that's why painting out on location and really observing what's happening with light is indispensable. You can't replace that kind of experience. But keeping some of those, what I just talked about, as a reference point, that can help us then when we're out there to determine, like if we're having trouble figuring out whether our light source is warm or cool, well, placing a roll of our paper towels onto one of our white panels or a white canvas and seeing what kind of a shadow is cast can help us to determine, if we're struggling, whether the light source is warm or cool, just by whether the cast shadow is warm or cool. So keeping in mind, warm cast shadow, cool light source. Cool cast shadow, warm light source. That will help us then when we're out on location to figure some of those things out. But always remember that that can change depending on if our object, if what we're painting is really in the shade, even if there's some warm light source out there that we can see, if our object is all in the shade, then that changes the whole situation. And then our shadows then can become warmer that way. And that can change even within our painting. If we're painting an area that's all in the light, and then we get out into an area, and we also have an area in there that's all in the shade, then the shadows that are created within that shaded area can be warm, while some of the shadows that are out in our lighted area of the painting can be on the cool side. So hopefully that's not too confusing for you, but those are really good things to keep in mind when you're out painting. Okay, so Joan, I like the harmony that you're creating with greens and reds in here. And then you also have a nice mix of these bluish leaves that are pushing farther away from us, that cool trying to go off into the distance and the warm coming forward to us. Now, taking some of these warm leaves that you have like this and maybe placing some of that over the top of some of your branches and trunks that you have here will really help to let the viewer know that yes, those yellow leaves are closer to us and much warmer. And then those blue ones, then you can have some areas of that push farther out, and that'll really help to increase the feeling of distance in your painting, that feeling of depth. So nice here the way you've got the misty feeling with these lavenders in here, and the same thing that you have here like we had with Gloria's, or sorry, with Elizabeth's, with the light rays coming through there. Nice job with that. Okay, so with your bank right here, having a change from top to bottom in value, because a lot of your underlying color that you've left, the values are basically the same from here to here. You have a little bit of that mist coming over the top of it, but even within this, you can really have some fun pushing the values of maybe getting some darker values in this area down in the left corner, bottom corner, and then as you come up or out towards the light source, lightening it up. Like maybe keep the light source or the values about the same as what you have here on the outside edges, going towards your light source of that bank. And then as you come back, darkening this up quite a bit. So this mist that you have on here is actually cooling it down and lightening up that value rather than darkening it. So if you get kind of a warm, like maybe some transparent oxide red with some ultramarine blue or something like that, and mix those together in varying degrees and place some of that in here, that will really help to round, to create a three-dimensional effect to that, to give it that structure, the feeling that it's an object with dimension to it. So nice color in here though. I love that orangish color on your bank. And then this bringing the orange down, it kind of cuts off your road. Your road almost feels like it's coming around like this. Sorry. But then your orange being in right here and that abrupt cutoff is kind of a little bit confusing right there. So maybe pulling some of this color that you have on through here would help that that road to come on off the end of it. All right. Same thing, what we just talked about with your bank. You could do the same thing with your tree that's back here. So to create a feeling of three-dimensionality, take some strong shadow color, like some of this dark green that you have right here, maybe pull some of that down into these areas, and some really warm brownish greens, or even dark reddish brownish greens down at the very base of that tree will really help to create the feeling, because your tree overall is very dense and thick looking. And so to enhance that feeling of dense foliage on there, or pine needles, really darkening up the base of this will help that. It'll help to increase the three-dimensionality of that. As well as, if your light source is coming from this direction, you might want to make one side of the tree, like over in this area, darker than the other side of the tree. But it really depends on how your light is filtering through as to that. So anyway, I think those are some good things to concentrate on. And then with any of these critiques, if you want, if you have a chance to go through and apply some of these things, if they work out for you, then let us see the altered version, what you've done with that on the next webinar, so we can all see the changes that you made to it, and if that worked out well for you. I'd love to hear about your thoughts, and if you think that any of these things made an improvement, that sort of thing. Let me know what you discover as you go along. Okay, Patricia, beautiful red colors in here. They really come forward. They really come at us, and I like that. I love red. It's one of the colors that I try to sneak in some bright red in almost every painting that I do. Part of why I do my signature in red, because then I know that I'm always getting some red in there. Okay, so right off, some of the same things that I just talked to Joan about. So your bank right here. All right, first, one thing that's been very helpful to me, I learned about 30 years ago that there are no actual concave structures in nature, which is very interesting. It was fascinating for me to learn that. And I learned this in one of my advanced figure drawing classes. So when we were drawing like the elbow, when you bend the arm and that space between the bicep and the forearm, a lot of us, when we were starting out, would paint that as a concave shape. It is not concave. There is not a concave spot on our bodies. Every bit of our body is convex. It comes outward, never sinking inward. It just looks concave in relation to the other things around it. But if we actually draw it or paint it concave, it will not feel real. It loses the realism, because that isn't real. So in landscape painting, it's the same thing. If you see a rock, like let's say that you're looking at a big boulder, and above the boulder, there's this water that's been dripping down and hollowing out a little bowl in that rock over the centuries. And if you look into that bowl, you'll think of that bowl as being concave. But in reality, it's not. It's a bunch of convex shapes that create that concave bowl. And that might seem a little bit convoluted or confusing, but keeping that in mind, the idea that there are no concave shapes in nature will help us when we get to something like this. So what's nice is that you bring out some areas, like right in here, to make it a little bit more convex. The overall concave feeling to it, like that, it's not as settling for the viewer. So when you come to a point like this, it often will lose the feeling that that is going to be what we would encounter if we were actually there. So if you can take what we talked about with going from darker to lighter as we come out to the edges here, and much of this comes back to that diffraction that we were talking about, the way that light bends itself around an object. Well, it's the same thing with a bank like this. As the light bends itself around here, the outside edge here is going to be much lighter than what we have usually on the inside, if the light source is coming from that direction. And this is going to tend to be darker. Putting in some lighter tones, they don't have to be significantly lighter. We're not talking about necessarily a real obvious contrast between the two. Oftentimes, it's very subtle little transitional tones that make the difference. So like with this bank that you have right here, maybe bringing, let's see, maybe softening down that edge right here so that this is much lighter than what you have back here will help so that doesn't feel like such a sharp edge. Because it almost feels as if this bank is very flat on the side that we can't see and flat on this side. So it almost comes to like a point, which usually we have more of that in a man-made situation. So to create the feeling that this bank is coming around and then rounding like the road is right here, we soften out this edge right here with some lighter and medium value transitional tones compared to what you have in here. And then coming out just a little bit with the bank so that it rounds the way that your road is will help to help that feeling of that bank rounding around. And then same thing between values. So if you can change up the values a little bit between this area that's farther away from the light source and this area. Now, as I say that, there are some addendums to that. Part of it would be that where you can get some very dark tones where like in this case, where there is a strong cutoff between the edge of the bank and the light source. So let's say that this was a wall and the light source was hitting here and just kind of bending around a little bit to lighten up this area out here, or some light is filtering down into here. Well, when that light source comes through and hits on the other side of this wall, then the area right here close to that light source can actually be darker sometimes than what it will be as it goes off away from it, because the light that is coming from the sky or whatever light source might be illuminating this area actually illuminates this more, and that contrast of values between the strong light hitting here and this being away from that light source, the tones, the shadow tones right here can actually become stronger, a darker value, just because of that immediate contrast between the dark and the light. But those become very advanced kinds of things, and those are things that you'll pick up on the more often that you go out on location and paint, and you'll start to notice some of those effects out in nature. So I like the way that you've softened the transition here between the road. You've helped to integrate the leaves that are falling and the road on this bank right here, because you've pulled some of the road color into these areas a bit. Over here, you've got a very hard line there, and that's possible. That does happen quite a bit. But on a dirt road, an old country road like this, with all the leaves just newly falling, more often than not, you're going to have a leaf here and there that is by itself out on the road. So just pulling a little bit of your color the way that you did over here onto this hard edge right there will help to soften that out and make a more natural feeling in there. I like the tones, the variation in color and tone that you have on this bank out here. That's very nicely done. You have some shadow areas and then changes in even the color temperature of the greens that you're using. These are much more on the blue, cool green side of things, and you have much warmer greens out here as they come out into the light. So I like that you've used a variety of greens and color changes as you've gone through there. All right. So, and I think with most of these, what we've seen so far is that the same thing that we talked about earlier can apply in here. And you know what? I did not. I'm with Joan here. You have the wires and the telephone poles, utility poles in here. I didn't even notice that there were wires in there. So it's fun to see all the things that get put into there. And it's what these are doing is they're helping to pull the viewer back into the painting back in there. That is fun. I like that you picked up on that. So one of the things that we've seen pretty consistently in a lot of the critiques so far is that idea of color tone and value change in the tree trunks. So many of the tree trunks that you've created, you have kind of the same color, basically, same value and same color in most of them. This feels as dark as this right here, and yet this is much closer to us than what these are over here. And sometimes the values in something like that will be very strong, especially in the photograph. So let's look at the photograph again here, and that might help things a bit. But if even in the photograph here, you'll see that these are quite a bit, especially with all that filtering of dusty light that we've got in there. These values are much lighter than the values that we have right here. And that's really what creates that feeling of depth, the feeling of distance that's in there. Is value, lightening the values up can help to push us back off into the distance. Now these ones here are darker than what we've got over here, but even they are still much lighter in value than what we've got with the trees right here. And I might be able to do a quick tutorial that I'll put up on the membership site with some Photoshop. I won't take the time today to do that, but I'll show just pulling out, or you can do it on your own since you have the photograph. If you go into Photoshop and you just select an area here and copy it and put it on another layer and then move it over on top of here, you'll be able to see quickly the difference in value between this and this. If you take some of this dark value here and place it over here, you'll see a really quick contrast between those. Okay, so I like that you did pull some of the red foliage that you have over the top of this branch. That really helps us then to know that that foliage goes with those branches. And you've got some of that as well coming right across these trees here. So that's great. That really helps to give the feeling that those tree branches and tree trunks go with that red foliage. And that's nice because then that also psychologically helps then to push the rest of this tree foliage back into the distance. And I love that you had a difference between the value in the lavenders in your road right here and the lavenders that you have in the bank back here. Excellent job there. That really creates a separation between the two areas. And this photograph is a little bit confusing. Just so you know, this road continues on around this direction, but then there's also, this is a fork in the road. There are two roads here. This one that comes towards us, and where the light source is going off there, that's actually a road back there too. So this is a fork in the road, and that can get a little bit confusing, but it really doesn't matter. It didn't matter that any of us know that, because this can then just be a bank that has like a turn in the bank as well. So we don't have to know that there's a road back there to paint that effectively. All right, and something that I've found that helps really punch the color in an area, especially when it comes to light like this. So when I have a strong light that's coming and it's hitting an area of like a bank like this, I'll create a difference in the value of the highlight areas. So let's go right back to this real quick. So when I created the light area here, I'll actually increase the saturation of the color. So I've got obviously a lot of white in the highlight area of that, the light coming down in there. But when I get into some of these areas here, or like up in this area, I'll increase the color. I'll put more yellow into it, or some other color in there, and really punch up that color so that there's a transition even in the values of my range of highlight area or range of light source. So as this beam of light comes in here and lights all this up, I'll have this area right here a different value than what I have down in here. And then when I get to an area right here where it's really strongly hitting on an object, I'll increase usually the color in that spot right there. And that doesn't always come through as well in a photograph as what you'll see in the actual painting. All right, so great job, Patricia. And sorry, don't want to do that. If you have some that come up like this, you have one that's going off the top of the painting like that. Sometimes pulling, actually these are meant to be short. So maybe taking one of them off the top of the picture, because that will really help to make this branch feel closer to us than this tree over here. So taking one of those off the top of the picture will help with that a little bit, and increasing the warmth of the color and the value in this branch right here compared to this one out here. Okay, so we'll go on to the next one here. All right, Ross, this really has a beautiful feeling of, it almost reminds me of like a Disney scene. And I don't say that in a light way. I love a lot of the Disney artists, the way that I think some of the backdrop artists for Disney are just geniuses. They're so good at what they do. So this really has, to me, that kind of an enchanted forest kind of feeling to it. So I like that a lot. And you've got a nice variety of color changes in here between the blue greens, the yellow greens, and your reds in there. And the way that you've approached your layers of trees going back, it really helps them to feel like they are stepping back off into the distance. And of course, the light blue, bluish green tone that you have back there in the distance also helps with that. So you've done what I was just talking about. You've got that tone change between the yellow right here at the base and a lot of the other light that's coming in here. And then a nice change, we can tell that this is a change between this and the other, that it's a road. Now this one, it could almost be water. It could almost be the color that you have there and the way the bank is right here. You could almost turn this into a river rather than a road. That kind of leaves it up to the imagination of the viewer. Now some of this, the way that you've gotten some nice tone changes back in here, like some of the lavender that you used in that area and the greens, going off into the distance, you can take some of these lavender colors a little bit, and you do have, this is more of a purple than what you have in this right here, but even really punching that and pushing it to a little bit more of an extreme, like you have back here, will also help to create more of a feeling of depth in there. And then having some transitional tones in here between the bottom of the trunk of these trees and your bank will help to fix those to the ground. Otherwise, they almost feel like they've been cut off at the bottom and they're floating there a little bit. So let's see. Where did I move? I just moved it, I see. So move that over. Okay, so when I come back, I'll have something that breaks up some of those trunks of the trees so that you feel like the trunk is coming down to the ground, but it also has the feeling that it's attached. So like right here in that little area, I've made the trunk much lighter because it's being affected by all the reflected light that's bouncing into it from the ground, from all the leaves and other miscellaneous stuff that's on the ground right here on that bank. All that light that's being reflected right there is bouncing into this area where the trunk meets the bottom of where it meets the ground. And so I've lightened that up right there and darkened it more as it comes up out of that. That helps to create a transition that plants that tree firmly into the ground and makes it feel like it's part of that. So you'll see that basically in all of the tree trunks that I do. I'll either overlap them with some other foliage and break it up a little bit, or I transition it down. So like with this one, there's a lot of light filtering in here in this foliage. So I've softened out some of the tree trunk as it comes down in there so that it's not a harsh ending between the tree trunk here and the foliage in here. So you'll see even in this area too, in each of these. And that helps then to put all those together. They feel like they all belong with each other and they're all part of the same scene there. This one, you've got a much nicer transition between them. Now breaking up, so this hard edge that you have coming between the foliage here and the trunk that you have right here, just pulling a little bit of this red into spots here and there, like it's a stray leaf that's laying over the top of that tree trunk. It doesn't have to be anything significant. It can be just like a little leaf that's over there, or a bit of grass that comes over the top of it. Little things like that will help to blend those. So you've got that really nicely right here with this one right in that area. So some of that has worked out nice then. Just work that through in some of the other areas too. And then with some of your reds right here, possibly doing what we talked about with some of the others, those transitional values. So getting some darker reddish brown colors back into these areas so that we know that the light source isn't getting through all that foliage nearly as much back here as it does up on the front edges. So that's what you've done with a lot of these yellows and greens back here. You've done that excellently in those areas. Apply that same principle, that same idea. Like right here, you've got this really nice dark bluish green right in here. And then you have a lot of lighter value, still dark, but lighter than what you have in the middle. And then you transition out to a highlight area. That's what helps to create that three-dimensional effect. So take that same idea that you have here and apply it into your red areas in here. Pull some darker reddish brown colors down into your tree area in here. So good job, you've broken up that arrow that we had in there. And so what we talked about before, like with this branch right here coming up into there, you could softly transition that sort of the way that you did right here, because you have this one that kind of breaks off sharply and this one. So just like getting that even thin, very, very fine and thin as it comes into there, and maybe changing up the color just a little bit, lightening that color because more of the light is diffracting around that tree branch. That will help then to pull that into some of that foliage, especially if any of the foliage here, because the way that I create the layering effect and distance in it is to make sure that I have branches like this that have foliage over them. I try to make the foliage so that it matches some other foliage. So if I want a tree to feel like it's going off in the distance, then I'll attach it with some of the foliage. Like if I have more bluish light value leaves that are way off in the distance, I'll have some of those go on top of the tree trunk so that I know that those two are associated with one another. And then if I want something like this one right here, I want this foliage to feel like it belongs to this tree, so I pull some of it on top of that tree and still have the tree come up behind it. And that tells the viewer then, hopefully, that this green foliage is associated to an extent with this particular tree trunk. So that's the idea to it. Same thing with some of these. When I pull this branch down in here, I have some areas where the leaves are coming on top of it like this, and then other areas where it's not. That's to help get that feeling there. So just in spots, if you want to have this tree be attached to any of the foliage that you have in here, unless of course you're wanting this tree to feel as if it is a stark tree, like it's one of those that's died off and doesn't really have any leaves to it, then by all means keep the branches and the trunks so that they don't have anything coming around them. But if you want it to feel like the tree is still alive and it's got some of that same foliage to it, then just take some areas of foliage and pull them over some of those branches and over some of the trunks, and that will help to then integrate those two together. You know, if one critique, that's part of why some of the critiques become shorter as I go along, hopefully, because you can pull some of what we've said in the previous critiques into the one that we're looking at that moment as well. This area of sky, some of these, I like the way you've pulled these out into there. It's nice shapes. And that's really important in landscape, is to have nice shapes that are interesting to look at. Maybe pulling some of that sky color into some areas in a subtle way so that it kind of breaks that up and gives a feeling of individual leaves here and there. Might help those areas a little bit right there. And you can do the same thing in some of these areas too, if you want to pull some of this sky color into some of these areas, maybe not dramatically, because I really like the feeling that you have of shade and a lot of dense leaves and all of that. That's what gives it a lot of the enchanted forest feeling to it. Maybe pulling some sky in here and there in a subtle way will also help to give some variety in there as well. All right, so let's see. And Ross has another one here. This is the winter scene. Beautiful, beautiful. This makes me think of when you get those ice crystals on the branches and on tree leaves and all of that, and the light comes through and captures it. That just has an incredible feeling of those ice crystals there. And that is a lot of fun. Great job there. So in this piece, some of these, if you get a little bit more of those lavender colors, because you've got some beautiful blues in your foliage in here. So maybe like a lavender that's a little bit more on the red side, but still a little bit lighter in value, brought into these tree trunks will help to push those farther into the distance a little bit. And you could almost take this color right here that you have and add some red to it and put it into that. So experiment with that a little bit, especially out on the outer edges, the outer branches and things as you go into there. And you've done that some with these right here. So experiment with that in attaching them to the tree here with some like reddish lavenders or something like that. It'll help to keep everything a little bit on the warm side and still push off into the distance a bit. You have some really fun breaks in your the grasses and things that you have here, and the snow. I like that, the breakup that you have there, and the way that you've led us in with some of the snow that's in shadow here that doesn't take too much attention, and leads us then that harmony that it creates when you have one color and you pull it through into other areas of the painting. That's a great way to tie all the different areas of the painting together. That's great right there. But it's not so much that we get stuck in this area. You've done a good job of, like, especially with some of these little areas here, pulling us into the rest of the painting that way. And I like your grasses. They have nice structure to them. The way that you have the light areas here, the highlights, and then you have more of the shadowed, shaded areas in there as well. So a lot of your paintings, they do have that enchanted forest feeling to them, or that kind of like that Disney feeling. And I say that in a complimentary way. Not, some people take that wrong, but that's a compliment for what you're doing here. It has a nice light and uplifting feeling to it. Possibly could experiment with your cloud, misty, light-filled area right here. Just a little bit of a tone transition between the light areas that you have in here, and as you go up into here. In fact, let me take just a moment. I'm going to pull up an older painting of mine. It'll take me just a second. That kind of goes along with that a bit. This is one that I painted about 15 years ago, but it'll, I think, give a good feeling about what we were talking about right here. There it is. All right. Okay, so see, even within this, I tried to create a real feeling of light there, but there are color changes and light changes as you go up into the light. So it's the same kind of light that we're dealing with that scene that we were talking about with the road. It's a filtered light, and there's a lot of particles in the air, that creates that. But I'm transitioning between the real bright flowers right here and off into what is the light source here. So maybe, obviously my colors here are different than what you have in the background on yours. So it's not to change the colors that you have in there, but maybe to change, if you squint, this value here is going to be a little bit different than what you have up in this area. So it's just changing, creating a little bit of value shift from one area of light to the other. So because this light, some of these areas are going to be just like what you do with your grasses, with tree foliage. There's going to be some areas of this light that capture more of the light and are much brighter than other areas of that. So that's something to keep in mind in doing that. And I like what you did with the sky here too, the transition between the dark up here and some lighter sky down towards the tops of the trees there. Now this right here, it looks like a rounded hill, but you've got kind of the same treatment on this side as you do on this side, even though it feels like the light source is coming from this direction. So maybe making this a bit brighter and then toning those down a bit with value on this side of the hill. Really, you've done a great job with that on the other hills that you have in here in other areas. Beautiful, very nicely done. Okay, that was all the paintings. If I missed a painting, I apologize. I've been putting them into a folder, but sometimes I miss one here and there. I get so many emails. So if I miss one in this critique and that you sent me, then let me go through all these and make sure. I don't think there's any. I think that was all of them. Then please send me an email saying, hey, you forgot about this one. I sent it to you before, and I'll get it on the next webinar for sure. And it could be that sometimes I don't get emails, the same way that all of you sometimes don't get my emails. Okay, so anything else that you would like me to cover as far as the critiques that we just did, or anything that you need clarified any better than that? I'm going to take it off of this and go back to our original. There we go. All right, we're back. So anything that you'd like illustrated in a different way, or something that we didn't cover that you thought, I can't believe you missed that. So anything like that, just let me know. Otherwise, that was all the questions and all the photos that we had for today. The painting that I had here has already been sold. So before the webinar started. So if you're interested in, someone purchased the one in the December webinar and the one in this one. So that offer is going to be standing through all of the webinars. So if you want to have an original so you can see the texture of the paint and the little subtle variations and changes in there, that's what I did with my professor, and I've used it over and over again over the years. I go back and look at it. Even recently, I've looked at it again. If you want to have one of those, just be the first to email. So, and Joan said, how long does the course last? Well, the course is, I mean, the videos that you have in the course, those you have an indefinite amount of time to watch them. There's no expiration date on it. So you can go back and look at the videos over and over again. These webinars that we do once a month, those I plan on having ongoing until nobody has any questions or has any paintings that they want critiqued. So I plan on doing these webinars once a month for as long as you'd like. Otherwise, I think that's it. So any further questions, give me an email them to me for the next webinar, and your photographs. Just with the next paint together, I'll try to get those photos out quickly, at least by the first week of the month, so that you can work on that, and then try to get those to me at least a day ahead of time so I can get them into the folder, if you will. And otherwise, that's it. So you guys have a wonderful rest of the month. Enjoy painting, and let me know ideas and things. So real quick, as we go along, I want to have this course be very instructive for you. So if there are any ideas, anything that you can come up with that will help you to learn better, or little tweaks I can do to the videos that are in the course, or anything like that, let me know what would be helpful to you. Email me and I'll see if there's something I can do that way. So I am very busy trying to get paintings done for galleries right now and shows that I've put off for the last 6 months. But I have, and in fact, even the paintings that I'm doing for the paint-togethers, I'm videotaping those paintings, and I'm going to edit all of that, and I'm going to put those videos on the membership site. So once I'm caught up with all the paintings that I have to do and have my galleries in good shape again, then I will have more time to edit those. So on a monthly basis, you'll have at least that video in there each month that will be new. And I'll try to get those. I can't guarantee that I'll have one every month. It really will depend on my show and gallery schedule. But I'll try to have those on at least on a consistent basis for you, so you have something else there to go back to. Otherwise, that's it. You guys have a great time painting, and sorry about that. And I'll talk to you later. And thanks for coming. It was nice to talk to all of you.